Franco Colapinto has joined Alpine as a test and reserve driver on a multi-year deal in a move that makes him an obvious threat to Jack Doohan, who will at least start the season racing for the team alongside Pierre Gasly. F1 is a notoriously ruthless place, especially where the driving market's concerned. Just ask last year's in-season victims Daniel Ricciardo and Logan Sargeant. But putting a target on your own driver's back before their rookie campaign has even begun, that's something else entirely. That's Flavio Briatore for you. The Alpine executive advisor has a history of making controversial decisions if he thinks they are in his and/or his team's interest. Since rejoining the Renault team he was forced out of in 2009 in the wake of the Singapore Crashgate cheating scandal, Briatore has already said he will not be swayed by emotion and sentiment won't come into his decisions. He's known to be willing to make tough choices and has said that Colapinto's been signed with an eye on the future and to give Alpine a great pool of young drivers to call upon. Briatore has also more than once left the door open to replacing Doohan after the start of the 2025 season. So the obvious question, why? Succession planning is important, but it's unusual to be so open to the possibility of a change so quickly. We'll get to the fact Doohan is at least theoretically in control of his destiny shortly, but the simplest answer is that Briatore, and maybe also his team principal Oliver Oakes, must not be completely sold on Doohan, who they put into a race seat because primary target Carlos Sainz rejected Alpine, and Doohan was the best placed Alpine junior who had a good attitude and was well prepared through his reserve role. But he was what you might call a legacy protege, certainly not one from the Briatore-Oakes regime. For that, you need to look at someone like Paul Aron, who was named an Alpine reserve driver late last year, and of course, now Colapinto. Colapinto can be called upon for what has broadly been described as driving services throughout the season, which will initially involve attending several races, testing older Alpines, and driving the team simulator at Enstone. That strengthens the Alpine driver pool and gives it a reserve driver and longer term option for the team who already has some F1 experience. Colapinto joins Aron, existing Alpine juniors like Formula 3 champion Gabriele Mini and Victor Martin, and the slightly left field signing of Toyota driver Ryo Hirakawa, announced only a few hours before Colapinto was. Reserve duties aside, even Colapinto's old team Williams knows what's really going on here, as team boss James Vowles said in acknowledging the move that this could get Colapinto on the grid this year, let alone in the future. Vowles said that Williams believes this agreement represents Franco's best chance of securing a race seat in 2025 or 2026. Wanting a deeper driver pool doesn't explain why Alpine would bring in another young F1 driver who's chasing a seat when it has so many of its own proteges already. Plus, Colapinto had a guaranteed test and reserve role at Williams, so he's not moving just because he thinks it'll be more fun on the sidelines wearing Alpine colours instead. He'll be joining Alpine in the belief that a race seat is more likely than it would have been had he stayed at Williams, if not for this year, then like Vowles says, for 2026. That is either based on hope, expectation, or maybe a guarantee. Only being on reserve for now is not the best scenario Colapinto could have found himself in for 2025, but it's surely one that he and his management believe give him the best chance longer term. Colapinto was part of the Williams Young Driver Academy from 2023 and looks set to remain after the end of his 2024 F1 cameo because he got that opportunity by signing a long-term contract. He competed in the final 9 races of 2024 with Williams, having replaced Logan Sargeant from the Italian Grand Prix onwards. Colapinto attracted a lot of attention with his initial F1 performances. He scored points on only his second start in Azerbaijan and again 2 races later in the United States, both being tracks he hadn't raced on competitively. That 5-point haul was 4 more than Sargeant had managed in 1.5 seasons. But Colapinto's F1 opportunities at Williams were always going to be restricted to that part season, as it had already signed Carlos Sainz to partner Alex Albon from 2025 onwards, so Colapinto's best chance was to force a move somewhere else. Red Bull and Alpine met with Colapinto and his management and had discussions with Williams about potentially signing him for 2025. That interest cooled when Colapinto endured a tougher end of season run with heavy crashes in Brazil and Las Vegas. But Briatore's head had been turned enough, describing Colapinto's performances as very impressive for a rookie driver and calling him among the best young talents in motorsport right now. That's why Alpine negotiations persisted, and it was clearly determined enough to bring Colapinto into the fold at the earliest opportunity, even though a race seat has to wait, be that later in 2025, 2026, or if it ever comes. Even though Colapinto's not taking a race seat right away, his presence in the background will only add to the pressure on Doohan. Whether Colapinto has a race drive guaranteed or not, we don't know for sure, but we don't think so. Doohan's fate should therefore be in his own hands, unless the commercial appeal attached to Colapinto is so great that it trumps all else. That shouldn't be the case for a team backed by Renault, but you never know. Doohan was announced as an Alpine race driver in August last year after the F1 summer break. He then made his race debut in the Abu Dhabi season finale after Esteban Ocon's surprise early exit from the team, and Doohan's performance was met with a resounding, it was okay, from Briatore. Doohan is safe in his race driver role for the start of 2025 at least, but it's been speculated that his contract contains a provision allowing Alpine to replace him after only a few races if he doesn't meet certain performance criteria. And if what we've been told is accurate, one of those 6 races was already used up in Abu Dhabi. Though that would be an aggressive version of what often exists in driver contracts, especially for rookies, it would still mean that Doohan can control things from the cockpit. If he performs at or above the level Alpine demands of him, it will have no need and perhaps even no method to replace him with Colapinto. All Doohan can do is approach the season in the same way he did his third driver role and his shock debut last year, with professionalism and determination to do the best possible job. Doohan's been at pains to be the best possible team player for Alpine, consciously avoiding the entitlement that sometimes makes young drivers in his position unpopular with their employers. This, on top of his performance, played a big part in him getting the nod despite the availability of experienced alternatives like Valtteri Bottas and Mick Schumacher, who Doohan outpaced when they tested together ahead of the final decision for 2025. Doohan's not regarded as a superstar in the making like an Ollie Behrman or Kimi Antonelli, but he's not to be underestimated. He's won multiple races at F4, F3 and F2 level, and in his final F2 season in 2023 he finished 3rd. Were it not for a cracked chassis that afflicted him for 5 events, he'd have had a shot at the title. The work ethic, strong mentality and the foundation he's built at Alpine means he should have every chance of making this opportunity work for him. Incumbency is a powerful weapon in F1, and if Doohan impresses, he will consolidate his position. But if it goes badly, the pressure will rapidly intensify, and the TV direction will almost certainly cut to a watching Colapinto every chance it gets. A natural question when any team lets its most promising junior driver go is why? McLaren allowed its youngster Gabriel Bortoleto to be signed by Audi and Sauber for 2025, for example. Well, the reason Williams has decided to let Colapinto go is pretty much the same. It has no room, and letting go makes sense. Williams consciously put itself in an unusual position last year, drafting in a young driver for less than half a season despite the seat already being filled for 2025. Though Williams had good belief in Colapinto, there was an element of this being a punt because Williams felt it couldn't be any worse than Sargeant, and Williams wasn't expecting Colapinto to do so well that it made signing Sainz a mistake. And on balance, Colapinto didn't. He just made a generally good account of himself with a very impressive peak and showed he would be an interesting option for a full-time race seat somewhere at some point. And Williams has no need to offer him a race seat right now. So Vowles knew that the best case scenario for Colapinto, which was to do well enough to attract interest from elsewhere, was also a pretty good scenario for Williams itself. Having signed Colapinto to a long-term contract, Williams could command a nice payday if someone wanted to get hold of him. That must have happened here. The news has been slightly strangely worded, with both teams saying they've entered into an agreement for Alpine to secure the services of Franco Colapinto on a multi-year deal. It's a bit more legalese than we'd normally expect. Maybe this isn't a complete break from Williams. Maybe Alpine only has him for a certain number of years. Maybe it needs a race seat promotion to become final. Or maybe it's just slightly unnecessary jargon. Whatever the exact details, Williams will be financially compensated in some way at some point. Given Williams is unlikely to regret having either Sainz or Albon over Colapinto, cashing in on external interest in him, then rejigging its queue of juniors to give more opportunities to others is financially prudent and makes sense from a sporting perspective. And it hasn't stood in the way of a good young driver getting a potentially better opportunity elsewhere either.